The other gentleman who I knew of from his grammar was Wallace. He's a respected scholar, and I found several articles by him against the Byzantine text. And lo and behold, it's the same arguments that Westcott and Hort use.
Hey YouTube, it's Pastor Dwayne here. I know the purple shirt, it's missing. There's a problem in my home. It's missing. So you just have to deal with the green shirt. Anyway, in regardless of the shirt color, I have with me Reverend Matthew Fenn. He is a Lutheran minister who is kind of advocating for the Byzantine text. Matt, can you go ahead and say hello?
Hello. Thanks for having me on.
Okay, so you are a Byzantine guy. Now, hold on, wait. I'm assuming that are you a Byzantine guy or a majority text guy?
I'm a Byzantine text guy. I think you're going with what's the difference there? Well, a
Yeah.
majority text guy, in as simple terms as possible, would want to take the reading found in the greater preponderance of extant manuscripts. They just counting noses, kind of, as Dr. Robinson puts it. Whereas a Byzantine text it overlaps with that largely, but it's one specific textual tradition. The textual tradition that was common in the Byzantine Empire from the fourth to ninth century ish.
Yeah, first to ninth century,
That's right, first to ninth century. Yeah.
That's funny.
In terms
Yeah,
of the manuscripts we have, though.
Yeah, I like to say the difference between the two is one of methodology and less of text, because we ran some numbers. I think there were like less than 200 differences between Matthew and the end of Jude. Just less than 200 differences.
Right.
I mean, they're so strikingly saying. What about Revelation? Well, Revelation is a different animal.
Yeah.
There'll be a whole other series for that. But yeah, they're remarkably similar. So, what brought you to a Byzantine position? Like, were you always a Byzantine guy, or did you start off like
No,
most in one?
no. And in fact, my grounding in textual criticism, my foundation was before I went to seminary. It was the book by James White, The
Oh,
King
okay,
James
okay,
Only Controversy. That was
gotcha.
my grounding in textual criticism and listening to the dividing line. And a lot of the basics, what are uncials and what are minuscules and all that stuff. I learned through that. So that was the position that I had first learned before seminary. And then when I went to seminary, that methodology was continued. In our Principles of Biblical Interpretation class, we had to read all of Metzger-Ehrman. The whole thing
Okay.
was assigned in class. And so the critical text, that's what we were taught. We were taught eclecticism and the critical text in seminary. I had encountered in my own broader denomination a good friend of mine, Dr. Jordan Cooper, who is a
Okay.
Byzantine text guy. I knew there were people out there who were Byzantine
Mm.
text people. And then one day, in an effort to dig into the issue and kind of see if I could come up with a response to him or to that position in general, I ran into Dr. Robinson's his case for Byzantine priority. And then I ran into another work. Oh, now I'm forgetting the name of the guy. It's a
Wilbur
short little
Pickering.
work, and you can find it online. It's older, from the second Van Bruggen.
Will Van Bruggen.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, Van Bruggen. Now, I was kind of interested in this, and I think it was, if I'm not mistaken, somewhere on the bowels of Facebook, Peter Gurry, who is a no small textual critic,
Mhm.
right? He's a big guy, but I think somebody asked somewhere on Facebook what was the best case for the Byzantine text. And Peter Gurry cited Van Bruggen's The Ancient Text. At least I think it was him. Hopefully I'm getting this right. I found that online and I read it, and the way Van Bruggen dismantles Westcott and Hort's arguments was just masterful.
Mm.
And then as I really liked the Tyndale House Greek New Testament. I liked its methodology because it was different from Nestle Allen 28. Nestle Allen 28 said, well, we're not trying to get back to the original anymore. We're just going
Mhm.
to get back to the Ur text. And so it seemed like there was an abandonment of evangelical Protestant principles there in
Right.
favor of a more liberal methodology. And the Tyndale House had seemed to have a stronger set of principles behind it. We need to have at least two manuscripts before the fourth century agree for each reading. And
Hmm.
that's except for Revelation because it's its own beast. And that seemed like a far more level headed approach to the text than the Nestle Island.
Hmm.
And Dr. Jonkin, is it Jonkin or Yonkin? I'm not sure. In the little paperback book that's an intro to that text, when he discusses the Byzantine text,
Hmm.
he simply repeats two of the three major arguments of Westcott and Hort. And that
Right.
surprised me. The other gentleman who I knew of from his grammar was Wallace. Wallace's Greek grammar his advanced Greek grammar is widely used in seminaries as an advanced grammar. And I knew that he had discussions with James White and other things, and discussions with Bart Ehrman. He's a respected scholar, and I found several articles by him against the Byzantine text. And lo and behold, it's the same arguments that Westcott and Hort use. They're not that much different.
Well,
That
James Snap Jr. calls that the parrot problem. He usually references that in regards to Mark 16:9 through 20, but it's totally applicable here too.
So that's what I noticed, and because of that, Van Bruggen's argument became stronger because it's not just an argument from the 60s against Westcott and Hort. It's now also an argument against almost the entire eclectic tradition. That combined with Dr. Robinson's masterful argument in his Byzantine Text edition, also his the Festschrift in his honor, the very
Mhm.
first
Yes.
essay in there has a nice lay level breakdown of the whole situation too, a lay level summary of Dr. Robinson's argument. So I digested all of this information. And then Dr. Cooper, my friend, published a book by Lettuce. Now, Lettuce is not
Okay.
a
Yep.
Byzantine text guy.
No, he's not.
Lettuce is a Textus Receptus guy. But I'm a Lutheran, and Lettuce is a Lutheran. And Lettuce was also a Missouri Synod Lutheran. So that's generally the broader tradition that I'm a part of. Lettuce, despite his advocacy for the Textus Receptus, has arguments that come from my own theological tradition, the post-Reformation Lutheran and Protestant scholastics. So after the Reformation, there's this era of Protestant scholasticism in the Lutheran and Reformed world, where it's sometimes called the Age of Orthodoxy. The pastors and seminary professors during this time were engaged in debates with Rome. Rome, especially Bellarmine, would attack Reformation Protestants and say you can't trust in sola scriptura because your New Testament is corrupted. It has all these errors, and because of that, you need an authoritative magisterium to tell you which manuscripts are correct and to reconstruct it.
Mhm.
And Lutheran theologian Johann Gerhard on the Lutheran side and others on the Reformed side argue surprisingly that inspiration and inerrancy are in the copies, specifically the copies that the Greek patriarchal churches maintained. So they're arguing that, well, yeah, there's some scribal errors here, there's some scribal errors over there, spelling mistakes. But if you compare these manuscripts with the bulk of good manuscripts, the issue vanishes. That's very different approach to the problem
Mhm.
than the 19th century and to today standard Protestant answer, and it's that the inspiration and inerrancy is only in the original. But to say that it's actually transferred to copies was a big deal, and so that kind of reoriented my entire thinking towards not what I would call a Byzantine only position,
Mhm.
but something far
Mhm.
closer to Harry Sturz, that the Byzantine text is an independent witness to the New Testament, a solid, reliable witness to the early text of the New Testament that
Right.
was in use in this region. And my own theological tradition has received that and has confirmed that that is a reliable witness to the New Testament. So that's kind of how I came into the
Yeah.
Byzantine position.
I would be curious. So you mentioned Jordan Cooper. So I actually think he's a Textus Receptus guy. I recall watching a video of him a little while ago. So uh, and Letus was an advocate of the Textus Receptus. So why Byzantine priority now instead of the Textus Receptus?
Well, the Textus Receptus is, as you know, a small subset of the Byzantine text.
Yeah.
And the Textus Receptus is not a thing in a sense. The Textus Receptus is essentially those few late Byzantine manuscripts that Erasmus could get his hands on, that were then published, and that the King James translators then used to translate the King James, which were then published as a marketing scheme. This is the received text. But if you look at like Johann Gerhard, he consistently refers back to the Greek churches and the Greek church
Mhm.
fathers to establish the text. And so the Textus Receptus is a historic, is simply a small, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but
Mhm.
it's a small subset of the Byzantine text, which Erasmus and Stephanus and Beza used in their printed texts, and they didn't have access to all of the texts that we have now.
Yeah, I usually get in a little bit of trouble with some of my TR friends when I suggest that it's the Textus Receptus is essentially, right, a Byzantine text, but with some Latin intrusions. And then, you say Latin intrusions. It's like, oh, yeah. But I think that, like, I mean, you look at 1 John 5:7, for example, we just generally don't have it in the Greek tradition. There's some
That's right.
arguments to be made for, I think it's GA 689. But for the most part, it's just not there. And I think there's no, but it's definitely in the Latin. There's no doubt about it.
Right.
So I think potentially that came over, but we're not going to make this about the comma because
No.
that's a whole other, go back in the video catalog. There's lots on the comma. With all that being said,
Mm.
let's talk about the so-called franken text argument. Now so this is the whole idea that the critical methodologies, whether it's CBGM or whether it's reasoned eclecticism or whatever it is, I don't know if CBGM and reasoned eclecticism are the same thing, or if CBGM is just a branch of reasoned eclecticism. That would be an interesting question to ask someone like Peter Gurry. So the issue is that when you take all of these readings piecemeal, one by one, variant by variant, you end up with a text that over short spans of passages don't have any manuscript support at all. So can you break that down for us? Because I think this is probably one of the biggest marks against reasoned eclecticism.
When the eclectic goes to the text and they want to establish their text, they go word by word, essentially, through the manuscripts, and they want to determine what is the strongest manuscript support for each and every word of the New Testament. It sounds noble. And so they'll go, okay, Codex A supports this word. And then, oh, look, Codex B supports this word. And oh, look, Papyrus 52 supports this next word. And they line up the best, strongest, what they assume are the strongest arguments for each word. And they reconstruct your New Testament word by word by doing that in Greek to establish the text of the New Testament. The problem with the methodology, doing it word by word, is they're never considering the larger sentences. And so by
Mhm.
piecing together word by word your Greek New Testament, in Dr. Robinson has pointed out that in hundreds of cases, they're making up verses that nobody ever had. And what that means then is, yep, he's got the list.
Yeah, that's right.
Um, that what that means though is the original, whatever Paul wrote or one of the evangelists, whatever they wrote was lost. It's
Mhm.
gone. It didn't exist. And until five guys in a room in the 20th century sat down and by majority vote pieced it back together. If we believe that God has preserved his word and that God, and how is that a preservation of his word? where in over 100, in 100 cases for single verses and 200 cases for two verses, those verses were lost and they had to be painstakingly re-put together. That doesn't seem to me to be the strongest methodology in the world.
Yeah.
And on top of that, the criteria which they use are very subjective. What is the shorter reading? What is in the older manuscripts?
Hmm.
What is the harder reading? What's the reading that's most likely to give rise to all the others? What reading matches best the vocabulary and style of the author?
Right.
And several others. A lot of those rules that you learn, then now you'll see books and textual critics saying, yeah, actually those rules don't always apply. And so it's a very subjective
Hmm.
reconstruction. And I think that its primary weakness then is that it shreds our confidence that God
Sure.
has preserved his word for us. And that's its biggest weakness.
Yeah. Now, just to be clear, right? So for the audience, the 105 verses, single verses with no manuscript support, that was put together by using the apparatus from the Nestle Aland. I think it was the 27th edition.
Right.
So there is a possibility that there might be a manuscript out there with a specific verse of those 105. But I took a few of those and I verified them against the ECM, which is the next newest, right? The next newest critical edition. Some of them are still there. So it's not like this is going to go away anytime soon. But what's really interesting about the franken text argument is this is kind of like one of those arguments which really gets to the root of the issue. And so when you ask a modern eclectic about this, like someone like Peter Gurry, they're generally okay with that. They don't see an issue with having verses split like that. But then there's a number of us, like Matthew and myself, who would say, "Well, no. I think we need to pause for a second and really think about what we're doing." So yeah, how does the reason eclectic get past it? Well, they just simply acknowledge that it's a thing, and then that there's no issues with that from their perspective. But I think from our perspective, it's, let's raise some alarm bells and say, well, maybe this shouldn't be the case. The Frankentext argument was probably, in my opinion, one of the biggest black marks against the critical edition.